Welcome back to another episode of The Conscious Artist, a safe space for conversations around mental health awareness for musicians, artists, and all human beings. I am your host, Pallavi Mahidara. I'm a concert pianist and teacher, and I am absolutely thrilled that you are joining us today. My hope for this show is that it will give all of us a sense of solidarity and knowledge that we are not alone, and together, through these conversations, we can create more awareness and change for a healthier future. Our guest today is a multi-talented artist that has built his career defying categorization. He follows his interests, intuition, and heart, and enjoys a wide spectrum of creative outlets. He is equally at home creating experimental programs and commissioning new works, soloing with major orchestras in the US and abroad, and collaborating with some of the most celebrated musicians of our time. I could go on about his achievements, but the main reason I asked him to join us today was for his honesty and willingness to share his vulnerability on some topics that I know will hit close to home for many of our listeners. Please join me in welcoming Alexi Kenney to the show. Alexi, I'm really excited to have you here with us today.
Likewise. Thanks so much for having me.
It is my pleasure. You know, when we spoke a few months ago on the phone, you shared something with me that I think many artists around the world experienced during the pandemic, which essentially was kind of an existential life crisis. You know, so many of us felt that we had hit a brick wall suddenly. You know, what do we do now that we can't perform? Do we even have a purpose? And I think it's safe to say that many of us dealt with increased anxiety or even depression, and we felt like our entire livelihoods were in question. Would you mind taking us back to your experience in 2020 with the initial lockdown and how that affected you?
Well, it's interesting. You know, right when the lockdown happened in March, I had kind of a break in my schedule, and I was already thinking that I would take a month or so and work on some creative projects. And of course, we had no idea at that time how long this would last. And so when we were all locked down, my first thought was the scariness of being in New York City aside at that point. I was kind of thinking, oh, this is great. You know, I'm already going to be free for this month. I'll just use this time to really hunker down and work on my own projects. And that included really wanting to learn how to arrange things for solo violin, which turned out to be a good skill to know how to do during the pandemic, as we all know. But, you know, slowly that started unraveling. Obviously, when the gigs that I was supposed to have started dropping out of my life and being canceled and not rescheduled and pushed back and then canceled again, you know, the realization, I think, slowly hit me. And there was a point. I remember there being a point in the summertime when I just felt like, you know, I think a lot of people had this sooner, maybe in March or April of 2020. But for me, it happened in the summer. I was like, oh my God, like this is real. This is the long haul. And I've never been a big practicer in my life. I've I think, always relied on motivation from a schedule and from having stuff to do and stuff to look forward to and stuff to work towards. And so without that, I began to feel so absolutely lost. And I ended up taking, I think, 3 months, if not more, away from the violin. I moved back in with my parents, which I know a lot of people can relate to. You know, fortunately, they live in a really beautiful area. So that was a plus. They live in the Bay Area in California. So I could spend time outside every single day. And in some ways, I feel like that was a blessing to be surrounded by beauty and nature. And I have wonderful parents. So I'm lucky in that way as well. But on a personal level and of course, on a career level, it was completely devastating. And interestingly enough, these feelings of not necessarily being entirely sure about whether I wanted a life in music, I don't think those feelings were new to me. I think they all just started bubbling up when I had the time to think about them, and when, my career as I knew it just kind of disappeared. But
Wow.
I've always had, I would say, maybe I don't know, a lukewarm relationship to this music field and profession. Not to sound too cynical, but I think there's a lot that I really don't understand about what we do in relationship to the art. For me, like, the music is so wonderful, and my relationship to the music and my relationship to the art, I think, is very pure. And some of the time, the music field, the music business, the whole like trying to get ahead aspect, this really bothers me. And I have trouble reconciling some of these issues even now, as things have returned. I still find myself questioning, is there really a place to be truly creative in this profession, and for that to be celebrated? So I don't know. I think, the pandemic, it just brought up a lot of these questions to bubbled up to the surface and kind of exploded for me. And yeah, I'm still struggling with those questions, even now that my life has sort of resumed as it was, and of course I feel incredibly grateful. Actually, I feel a renewed sense of purpose in the times that I do get to share my playing with audiences, and traveling, and all of that. I think that I was taking a bit for granted before the pandemic. Now I feel very, very lucky, and that's not necessarily a given in life. But lingering in the back of my mind kind of at all times is like, how can I embody my own creativity and individuality and really bring that in an honest way to my life through music, without getting caught up in a lot of the things in this profession that I find sometimes a bit shallow or disheartening or competitive or whatever that may be.
Wow. First of all, thank you for sharing this with us, your experience during the pandemic, and your honesty, because I don't think you're alone in how you feel um, regarding the music world, the artistic world, and the business aspect of it. I certainly share, as you say, maybe lukewarm feelings towards the business side of what we do. And I really related to what you said just now about having a very pure relationship and connection with the music and the art that you are trying to contribute to the world. I mean, I play this music because I don't think I could live without music. And I play these pieces of great art from these great composers because it speaks to me in a way that nothing else does. And it allows me to communicate in a way that, doesn't require words and doesn't require any frivolity or nonsense around it, but it's just pure, genuine, authentic, as you say. And I think a lot of us perhaps started to question and rethink how we were going about our lives in general, whether it was, with our professional fields or with our personal lives or whatever it is. And my experience was a little different with the pandemic. I was supposed to have a series of concerts in March 2020, both in Europe and in the States, within a couple of weeks of each other, with like 5 or 6 different programs. And so I was very stressed. And one after the other, like the first one got canceled 2 days before. And then 2 days later, the next one got canceled. And then 3 days later, the next one got canceled. And each time it was like I almost even, I stopped being stressed. And I stopped worrying about it because I was like, well, I don't see how this is going to go forward,
Right.
And it was weird when the last one got canceled and we went into, at least here in Europe, we had like a proper full lockdown. I was kind of relieved. I actually had time for what felt like the first time in my life to sit quietly and take a break. And I'm like you, I have trouble feeling very motivated. I say I can't live without music and I can't, but I have trouble feeling motivated to just
Yeah.
sit and practice without, having concerts or this or that or this project. Or I would say teaching was something that saved me during the pandemic because it kept me constantly at my instrument and constantly engaged in what I was doing because I wanted to keep giving in that way. But yeah, it was definitely a strange time. And you talked a lot about creativity. I was curious because I know you have a lot of creative outlets and a lot of interesting ways that you like to express yourself through music and art. And I'm curious to know if your interest in other creative outlets was ignited during the pandemic, or were they already there and COVID actually gave you time to develop them?
I was going to say, as I'm listening to you talk, I think one thing that I learned about myself, or that I'm trying to apply back to my life now that my career has sort of resumed, knock on wood, is that I can live without music. I mean, I can live without playing music in a way. Of course, I went through like a pretty deep depression because because of the loss of the life as I knew it, my life as I knew it. But I think little by little, what ended up creeping back in is the sense that actually I am a human being. I can exist without concerts. I can exist without
Hmm.
pressure, without motivation. My body, my mind, my spirit, my interests don't have to shrivel
Yeah.
without these things. And um, I've always considered myself, I have many interests. I'm always, whether it's because I'm trying to distract myself from or delay my practicing or whatnot. Like I'm always trying to look for things to do outside of music. And I love walking. I love eating. I love just
Those
kind
are
of,
my favorite hobbies too.
oh yeah, it seems kind of basic, but it's true. I mean, I can spend an entire lifetime, I feel like, especially living in New York City, for instance, like it's just endless. The people watching, the architecture spotting, the seasons, the food, of course. I mean, it's,
I would make a career out of eating if I could,
oh
honestly.
yeah. Oh yeah.
But good food, only good food.
Right. No, but I think, that's something that, it sounds kind of dumb, but I don't think I really had recognized that in myself before I had all this time away from the instrument. And of course, that time during the pandemic was really tumultuous personally and, probably net negative in the end. But that sort of baseline of like, well, actually, I can exist. I am a human. If I choose so, I don't have to play the violin. And I think on the flip side of that, now being back and playing again, I feel this is a choice. I had the choice to walk away
Hmm.
and I did not. And I've been thinking a lot about that. And what you say, of course, music is me in a way. I feel so much more at ease expressing myself through music than I do through any other medium. And that simple fact is what is keeping me going. That cuts through all of the other stuff that I'm talking about, that I'm, the disillusionment with the field, the constant sort of having to keep yourself up to a certain level, to a certain amount of pressure, the grueling traveling schedule at times, which makes you question whether it's worth it. At the end of the day, it's that simple fact for me that this is a method of communication that I am the best at, that feels the most
Hmm.
authentic to me, that feels the most easy and emotionally connected and gives me the most satisfaction. So, yeah, I mean,
Wow.
that was something that I think I learned during the pandemic for sure.
Oh, I love that. And I would like to say on behalf of the entire music community, it would be a duller place without you and your violin playing because
Oh,
you are such a phenomenal player. I just like I've never gotten to hear you live, but all the videos that I've heard and recordings that I've heard of you, there's just so much. It's so pure. That's the only word I can use. It's so
oh,
pure when you play. And I love it. So I'm grateful that you continue to play.
Thank you so much.
No, of course, of course. But it's funny because I also didn't really practice much during the first lockdown. As I said, I'd been practicing like crazy leading up to it, and it was like, oh my God, I'm allowed to take a break. I live in Madrid, and here in Madrid we weren't even allowed to take a walk for,
Mm.
I think it was 2 months from March to May, only if you had a dog, I believe. So I actually didn't leave my house for 2 months, like only to go to the supermarket or, to walk your dog or whatever. So that was quite interesting. And yeah, like it was more simple things, reading, doing puzzles, like binging something on Netflix, creating new recipes, whatever it was. It was just relaxed downtime that I felt that I was given permission to have. And it was a little bit frustrating. I remember in the beginning of the pandemic, this overzealous need with many to be overproductive. And
Mm.
I was just like, no, I'm sorry. I don't want to sit and like build a business or create no, I can't. Like, I would just like to rest, please. Then, right after the end of the lockdown, some big things happened in my personal life, which changed everything. And with that, to be honest, that in a way sort of took the focus off COVID and the lack of concerts and all of that stuff, because I was completely submerged in what was going on. And I don't know how it's been for you in your experience in general, but for me, when I'm dealing with something very difficult in my personal life, when I'm struggling a lot or I'm going through a dark period, I don't really have the desire or the motivation to play a lot, because for me, playing music brings me so much joy. It's such a light, like a ray of sunshine in my life always. And I was like unable to bring whatever darkness I was experiencing in my life, in my personal life, to the music that I was playing.
Mm.
And, I know some artists, they say like, channel it into art, make art out of it. For me, I couldn't. And I know that like with some great artists, their depressive periods, struggles in their personal lives or this or that, financial issues, whatever it was, those are generally the periods where there's no output. And it's generally after, when they're coming out of those periods, where some of the greatest art comes out.
Right.
And I'm just curious to know your experience during the pandemic. As you said, you mentioned that you didn't play really for a couple months, and what is your relationship with that? Because I know it's different for many people, but I feel like we don't talk enough about the fact that you don't have to want to play all the time, even if you love what you do. You know?
Hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think when I took that time off, it wasn't like I chose to take the time off. It was I can't bring myself to play. I can't somehow I don't think I even listened to music during that time. It was like I wanted nothing to do with it somehow. And
Mm,
probably the composer in my life that I've associated with the most solace is Bach. And
yeah.
I just, in other dark moments in my life, I feel like I've been able to somewhat find that comfort in music. And for those,
Same, actually. Yeah, same,
yeah,
same, same, same.
for
But this
those
time was
few
different. Yeah.
yeah, it was so different. I'm still not sure why exactly. It was just like I felt so separated from, I don't know, at once, of course, it was like this deeply emotionally turbulent and depressive time. But at the same time, I felt like it was almost like living on in another dimension. Like I felt kind of devoid of emotion and
Mm.
without purpose and without like not knowing how to emote in those in those ways. And I think maybe that's why
Yeah.
I just didn't feel like I even connected with that music during that time, which feels so crazy, looking back on it. It's like eventually I think it was the music that pulled me out of my depression, but during that time it was pretty rough.
No, but like I said, that's so common. I mean, I remember Rachmaninoff also, in one of his depressive states, he didn't compose anything for a while. And it was after, I believe it was his aunt that suggested he see a psychotherapist. And once he started to get better, I believe then he composed a second piano concerto.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, but, there was a period of time where he didn't compose anything at all. And we can't always be expected to just produce.
Yeah.
Um, and tying it back to creativity, I mean, I would love if you could talk a little bit more about some of the different projects that you do and how you find joy and comfort in expressing yourself in different ways. Because again, this idea during the pandemic of like this overproductivity and need to constantly be doing something, that was exhausting. And I think through the last 2 years, a lot of the world has awakened a little bit more. And a lot of us are realizing that, okay, maybe I don't need to do everything that I was doing before just because I was doing it. We don't need to live on autopilot. It's actually quite unhealthy to do so. And maybe we can start asking ourselves questions like, are we doing what we want to do? Or are we doing what we think we're supposed to be doing?
Yeah. And I feel like I'm so contradicting myself, even in my own head when I'm thinking about this. But, I just said like every opportunity post pandemic has felt like a gift. And I really do truly believe that. And I'm treating them as such. And every concert, it feels like I'm choosing to do this and I'm going to give it my all. And like, I've got to be into it, and I'm fully engaged and all of that. But at the same time, I feel, I've just finished a stretch of doing a bunch of Sibelius concertos in a row. And that experience it was unique for me. I've never had the chance to play the same concerto more than maybe a couple times in a year, and
Mm.
having so many performances of that obviously very complex piece back to back was really valuable and actually very like deeply satisfying and interesting to explore that piece in that way. But at the same time, it's like sometimes began to feel like I'm just going where I'm told to go and doing what I'm told to do and traveling these long distances. And, yes, of course, enjoying so much of it. But there's an element of like, of course, I need to bring my own self and my own creativity to even a performance of a standard repertoire like that. But for me, I think what I'm looking for in my life is to add in more of these sorts of authentic projects that I personally need to keep myself engaged and also, are just a bit more individually expressive than, at least I'll give you an example. Like I'm working on this solo program with electronics that incorporates all these movements of Bach interspersed with many contemporary pieces, some commissions, and the whole program goes pretty much attacca, so all without pause. This is an idea that I've always been really into this when programming, that I believe in energy flow, and I believe that a piece of music such as the Bach Chaconne, for instance, when I've heard that stand alone in a concert, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around it, and it's hard to get in that zone and get in the flow of things as an audience member, and
Mm.
also as a performer. And so, I'm really interested in this idea of how do I open up myself and open up an audience to be ready to receive these works of art, and that's not limited to the chaconne. I think that's equally as important in a contemporary piece, or some of these other movements of Bach. And so the idea of this program is really to just explore that, and how do we how can we as a performer kind of act out or embody through programming a trajectory and a story. The Sibelius concerto is a story as well, or Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto. Of course, that's a huge trajectory and a story. But sometimes for me, it's this aspect of going where you're told to go and doing what you're told to do. And I'm trying to chip away at that a little bit and kind of really investigate what's really within me and how to bring out my own creative powers, such as they are.
Wow, I really love that because it's uniquely you then. Hearing you say that you feel like you're contradicting yourself, it reminded me of something my therapist has said, and I think is a quite common phrase in the psychology world, which is two things can be true
Mhm.
at once. You can be grateful for the things you have and want something different. And I remember that was one of the most important lessons I learned of 2021, which was the word and.
Mm.
I had spent my life saying or this but that, and it's a simple thing, but accepting the duality of life, accepting that there is no one universal truth, and therefore there is no one universal truth for each of us, for all of us rather, and that each of us have our own truth and our own perspective and our own desires and our own things that we find exciting or that we connect with or that make us feel alive. And I talk about this in the first season of the podcast with Nick Kendall. We talked about success and how success doesn't have one definition, but in life, in the music world, in the non-music world, there are very limited paths that society
Mhm.
has told us we should follow. And it can feel so limiting and make the world feel so small because it's like, well, okay, so there's like limited spots. And if I don't make it to that exact spot at this exact time, then I'm screwed. And that's not how it works. I think if we're actually given the chance to explore and present our different strengths and our different talents, then we do find ways to be uniquely creative. We do find ways to make the world a bigger place. I understand. For me, I feel opposite to you in the sense that for me, I've never really connected to breaking free from the structure of classical music,
Mhm.
because that's where I feel most connected. When I play Brahms' Second Piano Concerto, when I'm playing these pieces, that's what makes my heart sing, and that's what makes me feel so deeply connected with what I'm doing. I remember growing up, I would feel like I'm not doing enough to be more creative. Like, oh,
Yeah.
well, I should be trying to do more crossover things or more collaborative things or all of these creative new vantage points that were coming out, I think, when we were sort of growing up. And the idea of collaborating with a dancer or with an artist or with a poet or something, like I always thought it was cool. I just didn't really see how I fit in there. And I love when I see other people. I was going to say branching out, but I realize even using the phrase branching out makes it
Yeah.
seem like we're going away from the norm, which is actually not true. You're just doing you. You're just
Yeah,
being uniquely you.
that's it. Like I love that you acknowledge that, it's like whatever it is, the standard repertory, like that is your thing, and that's where you derive your satisfaction and your love and your joy. And like I think it's so beautiful and like not accepted enough yet in our little fields, that it's like, yeah, there is room for everybody. I think that
Yeah.
that simple truth, that really set me free, is like there is room for everybody to have their little thing to do. There's room for everybody to flourish. I think there's room for every individual because it's art, and it's like,
It's
we're
subjective.
ourselves, and it's in the end not really about what we're doing, but how we feel and how we're able to manifest that, and
Yes. Yeah. And
I don't.
I didn't find it with, collaboration or with experimenting with different genres of music, but I found it in my podcast.
Hmm.
I found another way to express myself and to communicate and to share that has been uniquely authentic and genuine to myself. And it's the first time in my life that I've been doing something that's away from the piano, away from performing and teaching, but that still has relevance to it. And I have realized so clearly that the reason why it came together so quickly and that I've been doing it and it's been quote unquote successful, meaning that I actually published episodes, is because I love it and it's
Yeah.
coming from me.
Yeah. And it's sort of, I think it takes courage to get to a point where you're like, or I don't know about courage. Yeah, maybe courage is the right word, to like know yourself well enough to be like, this is my thing, and I'm not going to be affected by the things that aren't my thing. you know?
Yeah. It reminds me of something else my therapist said, which she had me do an exercise once, which was like to write down all of the noise in my head, like all the pressures that I put on myself or have come from, society or culture or parents or friends or partners or whatever it is, and just write all of that down. And I wrote 2 pages, which were literally like, I have to do this. I should do this. I should be kind. I should be a good human being. I have to be a hard worker. I have to, it just went on like this. And I remember at the end of the 2 pages, I just wrote in caps, I am tired. And then I cried for 4 hours. And I was like, okay, there's something wrong here. Like, life shouldn't be this hard. And I went back the next week for my session. And she said, now I want you to change everywhere you said, I have to, I must, or I should, to I want to, I choose to, or I don't want to.
Mhm.
And that was the most liberating exercise and moment of my life because it was like somebody was giving me permission to actually think about what I wanted to do, how I wanted to be for the first time in my life. And, I have an amazing family. I have incredible parents. They've always been so supportive. But we also grew up in a generation where certain ways of speaking, certain ways of presenting yourself in society and culture were expected. Like, don't cry, don't be sad, don't be mad, or what will people think if you do that or if you don't do that? Or, you have to get good grades, you have to have a good job, you have to quote unquote make something of yourself. And while that instilled a huge amount of discipline and resilience and grit and strength and perseverance, it also led me to realize that for the first 33, 34 years of my life, I was kind of living for other people.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I've gone through a very similar thing. I think, to bring it to career in a way, I've always felt like, and actually something that my mom always told me is, well, just keep your options open. Like, always do everything, try everything, and keep your options open. And I've really, I still try to live by that to this day. But I think for a while, in the past few years, I would accept everything that came. I would just try to do all these different activities career wise, play a lot of chamber music, try to play some solo, try to play some orchestra, just do every activity possible. And at a certain point, I was good enough at playing concertmaster that I was offered a position to be a concertmaster somewhere, and it kind of stopped me dead in my tracks. And I was like, I was so confused. I was like, I don't know. Now I'm like, I've kept my options open. I'm like sort of, quasi good at a lot of different things. And here I am being asked to choose one, and I don't know what to say. And it took me like
Hmm.
2 years of thinking about that and wrestling with who am I? What do I want? What do I want from this, from my
Yeah.
life?
Yeah.
And obviously, taking a position like that, it's a life decision. It's a major, major thing. You're no longer a free agent. You
Right.
are kind of wedded to, it's a job. Uh, it's a lifestyle. It's, interpersonal relationships are very complicated.
And
It's
there's the added stigma of like, oh, if you're an orchestral musician, then you're no longer a soloist.
that was what did it for me. Actually, at the end of the day, I realized at the end of 2 years, I realized I actually never wanted it in the first place.
Mm,
I see myself as trying to get away from a lot of the things that orchestra, an orchestral job like that would require me to do. And, um, a lot of these sorts of, actually, a part of it was like playing the standard repertoire and all of the symphonies and all of the stuff where, like, as an orchestral musician, you're not heard. Your voice is one of 100, which I think for a lot of people, is that power and that force by numbers. Like, that's very moving and very comforting and wonderful, and that's why people want to join orchestras. But for me, it's like I so missed my autonomy. I missed reacting to people's sounds. I missed people reacting to my sounds. I missed being on the edge of all, possibility, as you are playing chamber
mm,
music or
yeah,
solo. And, you have control, but you also have you're on the edge of creative possibility in a way that playing an orchestra, just it never can really be that way. And I finally realized that, and I was like, it was a moment of, like you said, it was like that was my I want moment. It was like, society, the field, the everyone is telling me I should want this position, and it's a huge honor to be considered for such a job and in such a wonderful orchestra, wonderful musicians, great conductor, obviously amazing salary. you know, Everyone is
sure.
telling me
Yeah.
I should want this, and I'm crazy not to want it. And it took me a while to realize I really don't want it. you know?
Yeah. Well, kudos to
I,
you for listening to yourself in that moment.
and the more I think about it, the more I realize, especially after my pandemic experience of kind of being on the verge of thinking about quitting. I think, if I'm the kind of person, like, if I'm not doing something that I am always feeling engaged with, I'm not going to want to, I'm just going to want to quit. And so I think that realization was crucial for me.
Wow. It's funny you say that because I was thinking about this as you were talking earlier about giving, like 10 performances of the Sibelius Violin Concerto. And, I remember, I follow you on Instagram and I've been watching you post about all your concerts. And of course, you seem so excited and enthusiastic about everything. And it's a reminder. I mean, I'm sure you were, and
Yeah.
and and it's a reminder and a realization that we never really know what's happening in a person's life. Social media shows us a very carefully curated version, whether it's through the sharer's perspective that's carefully curated or our own perspective that is biased and filtered. Um, and, that can often lead us to compare or judge or assume and even diminish the experiences and existence of others. And, one of the challenges of social media is this concept of visibility versus invisibility, privacy versus what's public. How do other people view you versus sort of like your public persona versus your private persona, all of these contradictions in a way. And I remember when we talked a few months ago and we were speaking about this, I remember you said you posed the question, what does it mean in terms of human interaction when you have, 1 million followers? What does that actually mean concretely? So I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit of your experience with social media and how you have learned to find a healthy balance with it, if you have.
Yeah. I mean, I don't feel like I'm good at social media, first and foremost. And I am also more addicted than I should be to social media, even though I know that people are posting, these kind of veneers of themselves, and myself included. when I post something from my Sibelius concerto recently, I'm not going to choose the part where I missed a couple notes. You know
Of
what I mean?
course, of
Um,
course.
Even though, yeah, I do miss notes. I did miss notes. I try
We're
to,
human.
yeah, it's like, veering away from social media for 1 second, I think actually there's a connection as well with simply just performing. There's this expectation of perfection, and actually maybe it's due to social media and YouTube and readily available performances, but I feel like so many people are quick to snap judgment on playing and
Oh my
on,
goodness, yes.
you know what I mean, on people's personalities and playing. But sticking with playing for a second, I look at somebody's schedule like Jenny Janssen, Lisa Batiashvili, these incredibly busy people. And if on some occasion they manage to have like a less than absolutely perfect performance, they're skewered for it. And it's like, I don't know what we're expecting from people. And I think there is that element in social media. It's like you see the aspect of somebody that they want you to see, or
Yes, yeah.
the least vulnerable aspect in many cases. I think there are instances where people are able to strike that balance of at least being to an extent quite vulnerable on social media. But for instance, I think in my own approach, I've noticed I'm not comfortable speaking, uh, like appearing on my social media. Like I'm not comfortable with my voice appearing on my social media for
Well,
whatever
thank
reason.
you for doing this podcast.
No, no, I mean, I don't mean that like I'm uncomfortable doing the podcast. I mean that like a lot of people do like live videos, or they have like selfie cam, like
Yeah, yeah.
little exposés or whatever. I don't know. There's this line that crosses for my comfort level, and I don't know what that means, but
Well, I
um,
can relate, so I don't know what it means either, but I
yeah.
relate to you.
I think all that to say is like, there is this aspect of like, however, quote unquote authentic my social media might seem, or somebody's social media might seem, there's always these millions of hidden layers behind everyone, and all of these unseen footage of somebody's
Yeah.
life.
I wonder if it's because like, when you were saying that, you're only going to post a clip on your Instagram or on your Facebook or whatever that is, the clip you're happy with. You're not going to choose the
Yeah.
section that maybe wasn't as clean or whatever. And it made me think because let's say we only had back in the day when we only had YouTube to post things on and we were posting entire performances.
Mhm.
I feel like we didn't care as much if we missed one small section, or we, missed that run, or had that tiny memory slip. Like, okay, if it's like 5 minutes, okay, maybe not. But if it's like 5 seconds, nobody cares. Because in the
Yeah.
scheme of things, you're proud of the entire performance. With social media, we're only posting 1 minute or 30 seconds or like at most 2 minutes because we all know everyone's attention span doesn't last more than 10 seconds. So of course we're not going to choose something that shows us in like a less than quote unquote perfect light because as you say, someone will be quick to judge us. Someone will be quick to quote unquote cancel us. And yeah, while social media has the power and the ability and the positive aspect of connecting people from all around the world, from all different walks of life, and bringing them together in one quick, easy interaction, it also has the power to tear us down completely in a matter of zero point 0.5 seconds.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, that's exactly the anxiety that I think a lot of people feel like in our profession with social media is like, I don't know whether it's true that it's necessary to have social media. I'm not really sure that it, makes a difference for how many concerts you get or whatever. It's certainly, I will say, it's been really nice and unexpectedly beautiful that some people who follow me have actually shown up in real life and introduced themselves to me, backstage after the concert or something, being
Mm.
like, I followed you on Instagram. I saw that you were playing here. I was so excited and blah blah blah.
Oh,
And that's actually like that's really cool.
that's the
That kind
beautiful
of
part.
exactly. That's a really great part of it. But there is that sort of nagging doomsday type of feeling always that like, yeah, what if you post something that flops, that somebody looks at and was going to book you for something and decides, oh well, yeah, he actually doesn't sound that good. And,
Yeah.
I'm going to move on to somebody who's always, never going to miss that shift or whatever it
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
or plays it with more panache or more charisma or whatever. I think there is that fear, which I absolutely hate. And I wish more than anything else that I could get rid of my social media. But I don't know. There's something that I think maybe it is those interactions between when people actually show up in real life, that it actually, that's kind of, it makes it a bit worthwhile in a way.
For sure. When you know that, well, going back to what we mentioned earlier, it gives you that real human interaction. It's
Hmm.
not just a digital robotic cyborg interaction, but it's a real human interaction where you get to meet the person behind the phone or the screen or whatever it is. And yeah, I mean, going back to the anxiety, it's one of the reasons why I don't have any personal social media pages. I only have like a professional Instagram and Facebook account and now one for the podcast. And if I choose to share anything that's personal, generally I'll put it on my stories and it disappears, or close friends or whatever, but I have realized for my own mental health that I need to keep my private life private as far as I feel it's necessary in order for me to feel okay with social media and, again, feel comfortable in my mental health with social media. I cannot share everything. I cannot be 100% vulnerable. And it's funny because I don't feel that way with this podcast. I'm talking completely openly to you now, as I do with
Hmm.
all of my guests. And I probably won't edit anything out, you know?
Yeah.
And it's because I feel like, I don't know, maybe it's just simply because we're given the chance to have a real conversation and
Yeah.
show up as our real human, authentic, imperfect selves.
Yeah. It's kind of bizarre in a way because I feel like, there's nothing that people connect with more than vulnerability, right? And
Right.
seeing your own quote unquote flaws represented in somebody else, especially if that person has a big Instagram following or whatever, I want to believe that would actually be much more powerful and much more meaningful, to have social media be something that showcases, a full self, but there's something just, yeah, removed and somehow kind of professional feeling about, as you say, you have a professional account and I have a professional account, and where is that intersection? Yeah, I'm not sure where my personal life and where my insecurities and my vulnerabilities align with my professional image. And
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting to think about. I mean, I have a separate food account on Instagram,
Oh, I
which
should follow that.
me joy.
Oh, okay. I'm
It
going to
kind of
follow that.
it's mostly just for myself to remember all of these, beautiful things that I've eaten.
I just like save every time I see like a recipe or like a restaurant that I want to try. I just
Yes.
have like a giant saved folder.
Oh yeah. No, I have like I'm so obsessed. I have a Google map with like all my recommended places around the world.
Oh my
It's called
goodness.
Alexi
Okay, you're going to have to share that with me.
and I have just like thousands of bookmarks on Google Maps. So I don't know that,
I love
but
it.
that's something that, like, yeah, you'd probably never know that about me if you just followed my professional page. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
that's like a huge part of my own life.
But in a way, somehow keeping it perhaps for you, and I mean, of course, only you can speak for yourself. So I'm just guessing, but maybe for you, that's a way to also keep it real.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like, I mean, I don't feel the need to showcase my inner self to the world, or to, the limited number of people that follow me. And in a way, I think, my music does that for me.
Right. Yeah.
And even though I am posting maybe the more polished clips from my performances, I think that, yeah, that my playing is like, that's personal enough to me.
Absolutely. You were speaking earlier about energy flow in programming, and it reminds me of this concept of energy flow between humans, between relationships, between people, between friends, between partners, between family. It's an energy exchange at the end of the day. And there's a reason that we don't want to keep giving out our energy to every single stranger on the internet, because we're drained then, we're not receiving that back. And so I don't think there's anything wrong in keeping whatever we need to keep for ourselves private in order to stay sane and stay healthy. We need to do what is best for us so that we can show up in the best way for others.
Yeah. And I think, that goes back to what you said earlier, and what we're talking about, of there being many, many facets to ourselves. And we should kind of release ourselves from this world of expectations, and just find who we are and how we can express ourselves where we feel like we're challenging ourselves, but still showing up for ourselves in a way, to be the best version of ourselves, and not really care about what else is going on, and what people want from us, and all of that.
Well said. Beautifully put. Well, Alexi, thank you so much for being here with us today. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and I really, truly thank you for your vulnerability and your honesty and your willingness to share with us your own humanity.
I've so enjoyed this. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you all so much for listening. I am truly grateful for the support from each and every one of you. If you would like to submit any questions or topics for us to address on the show, you can send us a message on our Instagram page @ConsciousArtistPodcast. Help us to spread more awareness by sharing this episode with your friends, your colleagues, your teachers, and your students. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sending you all so much love and strength to tackle this week, and we'll see you next Monday for another episode of The Conscious Artist.